Recording. Great. So welcome everyone to this webinar, Challenging the Repression of Palestinian Rights Advocacy. Great to see so many of you attending. My name is Thomas van Gool, Project Lead Israel-Palestine at PAX, one of the organizers of this event. Together with Al-Haq, SOMO, the European Legal Support Center, and the Rights Forum. Also, of course, a special welcome to our speakers, Wissam Ahmed, Giovanni, Fasina, and Lydia Leo, whom I will introduce at a later stage. As you're all most likely aware, a month ago, Israel designated 6 prominent Palestinian human rights NGOs and civil society organizations as terrorists. During this webinar, we will try to shed some light on that, discuss the implications of this repression on Palestinian civil society, and will also address the responsibilities of third states parties, such as the Netherlands, and concrete actions we should expect from our authorities. We will highlight the importance of civic space for human rights advocates in the context of Israel and Palestine in general, but also how it's connected to shrinking civic space in the Netherlands. And we will also provide some concrete examples of suppression of civic space in the Netherlands. But before we start, some housekeeping and logistical notes. We start with the presentations of our 3 speakers, and at the end of the session, there will be a Q&A. So questions can be posted in the Q&A box, which is most likely at the bottom of your screen. And of course, feel free to already ask questions you might have during the presentations of our speakers. So then we can address them at the end of the webinar. And maybe some questions we can already answer during the speeches of the speakers. In case you might encounter any technical difficulties, please just send a message to all speakers and moderator via the chat function, and my colleagues will assist you. I see that some more people are dropping in right on time. Then I think we are good to go, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, Wissam Ahmed. So Wissam Ahmed is a Palestinian American born and raised in the US. He has a BA and Juris Doctorate from Louisiana State University and an LLM from the Irish Center for Human Rights in Galway. He has been working as a human rights advocate with Al-Haq since 2006, where he is now the director of the Applied Center for International Law and coordinator of Al-Haq's Business and Human Rights Program. This area of research focuses on the economic incentive structure, perpetuating the colonization of Palestine along business lines. Wissam will provide us with some background to the decision to label the 6 NGOs as terrorists, of which Al-Haq is one of them. And Al-Haq, as you might know, is one of the oldest Palestinian rights groups, one of the organizations providing input for the ongoing ICC investigation, and winner of many awards, including the Geuze Penning, which is a Dutch prize for human rights defenders. Go ahead, Wissam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the opportunity, and thank you for everyone for participating and taking concern to the recent developments. And I think, I want to put everyone in a picture of the situation within the broader context of, as you mentioned, the issue of shrinking civil space. And Israel's attack on Palestinian civil society has been ongoing for years. And this recent escalation falls within this broader tactic that has been ongoing. And over the years, Israel has very much been playing on the issue of behavioral psychology and connecting in the conflation of terminology of anti-Semitism, terrorism, BDS, human rights advocacy for Palestinians, Israel's existence. All these things are put in a narrative to make people associate Palestinian human rights work in a negative light. And I think this is part of the challenge that we are facing now in having to bear the burden of proof of addressing Israel's allegations that are unfounded in the first place, but them being taken at face value from our European allies and counterparts that are waiting to see what evidence Israel is providing. And I think it's the recent developments very much call into question Israel's evidence and its methods of operation and how it engages with Palestinian civil society. The recent revelations with regard to the Pegasus spyware being used on Palestinian human rights defenders is very much a part of Israel's ability to exploit the captive population in Palestine and develop this kind of technology and use it and abuse it, and then also market it outside where it's used against human rights defenders elsewhere as well. And I think what we see is, considering the power that Israel has as an occupying power in control of a population and the ability to develop such technology, puts within its power the ability to control the connections that exist at a digital level and require us to really scrutinize and call into question the possibilities of the fabrication of evidence that can be used. And this was the thread that we started pulling when we became aware of the suspicious activity on one of our colleagues' phones. And so once we became aware of this and gave it to a third party to investigate, it's clear that the Israelis were also put on notice that the Pegasus software was discovered. And this has been a part of the narrative in the media that it played a role in having Israel move forward with this additional step of escalation and the designation of the organizations was the discovery of the Pegasus software. And I think this is part of the broader policy that Israel is using to try to distract Palestinian civil society from the work that it's doing and create this climate of fear in engaging with Palestinian civil society. And it is something that, as our European allies, especially in the Netherlands, Israel is playing to that simple human nature element of fight or flight. And Israel is betting on flight. Israel is trying to escalate the concerns around engaging and continuing the Palestinian Solidarity Network and the support that exists with these 6 organizations and Palestinian civil society as a whole, because these 6 organizations are very much interconnected with Palestinian civil society throughout. And this is an important component, and the recent escalation needs to be seen within this much broader context. And it's also important to keep in mind that these tactics of outlawing organizations or designating them as terrorists, these aren't unique to the Palestinian context and the tactic being used against human rights defenders. It's been used in the Americas, it's been used in Africa, it's been used in the Asia Pacific. It is not a new tactic, and on the contrary, it is part of the relational dynamics between the colonizer and the colonized. It is not surprising that Israel, in its policies, would deal with Palestinian civil society in their struggle for the right to self-determination to use this tactic against them. And really what's most concerning, I think, for the broader international system of the human rights regime and how it's evolved is, over the years, and Al-Haq's development as well has been very much around these tools that the international community has designated for us to be able to use in the process of decolonization, in the process of the struggle for the right to self-determination, the tools that have been made available through the international system, international law and the international mechanisms that are available, including the International Criminal Court. But because we have been able to use these tools in a manner that still causes discomfort to Israel and its broader policies and colonial ambitions, this is the response that we get to try to remove us from the equation as an obstacle to that broader policy. And obviously this sends a dangerous message to international civil society as a whole and the faith in the international system functioning on the basis of the rule of law. And we feel like this issue needs to be seen much bigger than the 6 Palestinian organizations on the radar now, because these kind of tactics can be applied further to other organizations within the Palestinian context, but also elsewhere as well. And if Israel is able to get away with it, others will be able to as well. And Israel has always been able to play on the sense of exceptionalism within the international system. But in order for a system to maintain its integrity, there can be no exceptions. And so long as Israel is able to flout this impunity that it enjoys and engage with the international community in this manner, a very arrogant manner, and use its power in a way to undermine the possibility and the potential for Palestinian civil society to function, it threatens the integrity of the rule-based system of international law as a whole. And I think it's an opportunity for international civil society to really stand up and the international community to push back and tell Israel enough is enough. The impunity that you have enjoyed, you are exploited, and these escalations are a sign that your accountability is necessary and is recognized as a threat to the integrity of the international system as a whole. And the role that you as European allies, Dutch civil society, play an important role in contributing to that broader support system, and how we move forward is very much going to be dependent on how you engage as European and Dutch civil society with these Palestinian organizations, and the role that you play in contributing to holding Israel accountable for these actions. And so I'm very happy to have my colleagues here from SOMO and ELSC to contribute to the discussion on the role that European civil society can play, because we feel that Palestinian civil society is very much an integral part of international civil society, and we have to function together as a whole to overcome these challenges. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Wissam, for your contribution, for providing a bit more background to that decision, and also your call upon the international community and Dutch civil society in particular. In case people have any questions for Wissam, please drop them in the Q&A box. Then it's time for our second speaker of this evening, Giovanni Fasina. He is the Program Director of the European Legal Support Center. The ELSC is the first and only organization that defends and empowers the Palestinian solidarity movement in Europe, including the UK, through legal means. The ELSC provides free legal advice and assistance to associations, NGOs, groups, and individuals advocating for Palestinian rights. It was established by the Palestinian network of NGOs Pingo and the Rights Forum in Amsterdam in 2019. Before starting the ELSC, Giovanni has worked in a human rights firm in Italy and in the occupied Palestinian territory in the development sector. Welcome, Giovanni, and he will shed some light on the legal implications of the decision, as well as more in general about the tactic of using lawfare. The floor is yours, Giovanni.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. And also thanks, Wissam, for your introduction and for your speech, which is indeed quite important. Yeah, indeed, during my presentation, I will, as Thomas was suggesting, I will try first of all to clarify very briefly what can be the legal implication from the European law perspective of a designation. And then I will indeed give you a bit more context of lawfare and what we saw as lawfare, especially in the Netherlands. So first of all, indeed, I would like to mitigate some concerns about what the designation means in Europe. And technically speaking, the designation does not have any direct legal effect because the designation applies only to Israel and to the occupied Palestinian territory. And for becoming a real ban, also, I mean, for having any kind of effect in Europe, there should be also a decision by the European Council to include Al-Haq and potentially also the other entities, the other NGOs, in a special list of persons and entities which are subjected to EU restrictive measures. So until these NGOs are not included in this list, the European list of proscribed terrorist organizations, this Israeli designation is basically absolutely not effective in Europe. And of course, there are limited chance that this will happen for many reasons, because also the procedure for which the European Council should adopt such a decision is absolutely require the Council to take into consideration also the kind of evidence for potentially listing an organization as terrorist, and this evidence needs to meet very clear, very high standards. And in our case, Plus 1972 and Intercept publish like an article where they were disclosing some information about this evidence, and the information revealed in this article clearly shows how also in this case this evidence is absolutely do not meet the required standards acceptable in European Union. Basically, in the article, it shows that what Israel put forward was a transcription made by Israeli officers of an interrogation with 2 former employees of a Palestinian NGO. And during this interrogation, I mean, so the transcript of this interrogation has been also completed and finalized by Israeli officials. And the lawyers of these 2 individuals also are claiming, are complaining about torture. It's clear that if this is the main piece of evidence they have, these clearly do not meet any kind of standards which is provided by EU Charter of Fundamental Rights and European Convention of Human Rights. And it's clear, therefore, that European Union and European member states government should absolutely reject indeed the designation and express concern about this decision. So if on the one side the designation does not have a legal effect, anyway, it's indeed very worrying, and it's clear that the main goal of this designation is to push for the defunding of the organization. They want to create a negative, the designation aims to badly perceive the organization as want to taint this organization, and to make more and more difficult for the European governments to keep supporting financially the work, the extremely important work that these civil society organizations are carrying out. And indeed, this is extremely, of course, problematic, and actually it fits perfectly within a delegitimization tactic that at the ELSC we've been documenting and observing in a recent report also we published. The idea of labeling human rights defenders as terrorists or anti-Semite is part of indeed a pattern that we observed Europe-wide. And in a recent report we published, we mostly focus on the Netherlands, and we try to have a better understanding and a better understanding on who are the main actors involved in carrying out these delegitimation tactics and how these attacks take place. So what was very interesting in our report was in the report we found 76 incidents, which are different kinds. We have smear campaigns, closure of bank accounts, and also what we call defunding. Defunding means, when it comes to defunding is a tactic where a specific actor is spreading disinformation with the aim indeed to stop and cut the financial support from an entity to a specific organization who does advocacy for Palestinian rights. From 2015 and 2020, we identified at least 12 attempts of defunding in the Netherlands. we've in regard on so who carry out these attacks, we identified two main actors. On the one side, we have primary actors who are responsible for the funding attack, and these actors most of the time are pro-Israel advocacy groups, which are or in the Netherlands or in Israel, and these groups are indeed like organizations such as NGO Monitor, Shurat Adin, International Legal Forum, and who are based in Israel. And then we have also in the Netherlands some pro-Israel advocacy groups, which basically copy and paste the allegation that these groups are putting forward and amplify them in the Dutch political and media environment. These are a small number of Dutch organizations, not too many. In other countries, the situation is kind of way worse. But it's very interesting to see how these groups work in coordination with each other for pushing forward these attacks. And the second actor is what we call enabler third parties. Enabler third parties are mainly political parties or media outlets, some media outlets, that voluntarily or without appropriate fact-checking amplify the messages and the allegations put forward by the primary actors. And I will give you a very clear example of them, or one of them. So basically, in January 2020, indeed, NGO Monitor, for instance, they published a report on another Palestinian NGO, Al-Mizan. Al-Mizan is a human rights organization based in Gaza. They do advocacy work also before the International Criminal Court. So they published this report making very, very inflammatory allegation that that the individuals working for organizations and the organization per se have ties with a proscribed group, namely Hamas or the PFLP. And immediately after the release of this report, we saw pro-Israeli Dutch groups like CIDI, Center for Documenting Anti-Semitism, and others, which immediately republished and sponsored, I would say, the report. And then we had like the Dutch right-wing newspaper, like the Telegraph, which started writing articles about the report. And then we had and this, so basically it's a kind of they start building pressure till far right MPs from the far right parties, Party for Freedom, the party of builders, they made parliamentary questions questioning the Dutch government, asking clarification to the Dutch government on why they were funding an organization that in theory is alleged to be a terrorist organization. So this for us was very interesting because this really is a perfect example on how, you know, they create a wave which it's aimed to indeed smear and taint the organization. This is only one of the main example, and for us was the most relevant one because in this case the Dutch government for the first time issued a very good response where they completely rebut and they completely dismiss the allegations, saying the allegations were extremely vague, that the fact that they clarified that some individuals which in theory were supposed to be affiliated with the proscribed group were actually not alive anymore. So information was very outdated. And it take a really strong stance in refusing indeed this accusation, which is something it's something I would say still remarkable, and this is exactly what is needed now after the designations. The main indeed the main issue, the main problem we have been seeing is the reluctance of governments and the European Commission to take a strong stance against these accusations, and so this is indeed kind of very problematic because it potentially could create doubts about the fact that the designation is absolutely it is baseless and indeed should be rejected. I would like even to conclude also quoting from the military, or quoting not military, or sorry, I would like to conclude quoting the some parts of the designation which was made against indeed the Al-Haq. So when Benny Gantz, the Minister of Defense, designated the NGO, there are a few lines which are very, very interesting, where basically they outline the cause for designating Al-Haq as a terrorist organization. And it says, I'm reading, Al-Haq was established in 1979 and became an arm of the Popular Front from the Liberation of Palestine. The declared Al-Haq activities are in the field of human rights protection. However, in practice, it is engaged on the behalf of the Popular Front in the promotion of steps against Israel in the international arena, which constitutes part of the organization, the PFLP struggle against Israel. This is, for me, a very good example because it says steps against Israel in the international arena, which clearly includes legal steps and legitimate form of advocacy that are widely protected in EU and in the Netherlands. So, and here I conclude, it's clear that this designation is a culmination of attacks that started way longer ago. And this is exactly the moment where, like the European Union, but also the Dutch government and other states, needs to decide where to stand. They can stand protecting human rights defenders, or they can, if they don't do that, they can become actually enabler third party and can enable lawfare organizations to keep harassing and harassing human rights organizations.
Thanks a lot, Giovanni, for providing a bit more insight also into the legal side of things and the strategies behind the law for use in the Netherlands. In case people have questions, I already saw some questions coming in, but feel free to ask them in the chat box, and we'll get back to you later, Giovanni, during the Q&A. And it's time for the third speaker of this evening, which is Lydia Leo. Lydia is a researcher with SOMO, the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations, based in Amsterdam, where she investigates the involvement of companies in human rights violations, in particular in conflict-affected areas. She also supports communities in their efforts to access remedy for corporate-related human rights abuses. And before joining SOMO in 2015, she conducted research and advocacy for a variety of human rights organizations in Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, and South Africa. Lydia also a bachelor's and master's degree in criminology and an LLM in international crime and justice. Pretty impressive, Lydia. Lydia will share with us her personal case, one of the tactics that also Giovanni already described, but Lydia will tell a bit more about that, and also the methods that are being used to repress Palestinian rights advocacy. Floor is yours, Lydia.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Good evening, everyone, or good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to join this panel and to discuss this really important issue that is not going to go away anytime soon, and makes it all the more important that we understand it properly and we organize together. I'll share my screen if it works. I hope it works. So now you should see about SOMO. Yeah, I see Thomas nodding. So a little bit about SOMO, because we might definitely not be familiar to all of you. SOMO is a NGO based in Amsterdam, and we indeed, like Thomas said, we investigate multinational corporations around the globe where they violate human rights or have severe impacts on the environment. And we've been doing that since, I haven't been doing that since the 70s, but the organization has been doing that for decades. And Palestine is only one of the many places where we do such investigations. I'll give a quick overview of the types of investigations that we have been conducting in Palestine, together with our partner organization Al-Haq. So one is into the gas extraction offshore the Gaza Strip. So some of you might be familiar with that case, which is basically foreign companies in collaboration with the Israeli Navy and government are extracting natural gas, which either belongs to Palestine or they're extracting it and using the territory of Palestine to transfer it, which is also done in an illegal manner. And the gas is then subsequently used to generate electricity, which goes directly into settlements. So that's one of the things we have published about. Another topic we focused on is agricultural industry in the settlements. Again, that I think people in the Netherlands will be familiar with. If you find fruits or vegetables in the supermarket with the label Israel, there's no way of knowing whether that actually comes from settlements that have been illegally established on Palestinian land. So we have been investigating that through different methods, really targeting the Dutch government and consumer also with information and requests, which I presume also the Israeli government does not appreciate. A third topic we have been focusing on is quarrying of stone in the West Bank. Again, it's a Palestinian land that has been unlawfully expropriated. Foreign companies such as Heidelberg Cement, a German company, come in, they accept the license that is basically a fraudulent document because it is based on stealing, and they start extracting the natural resources from the Palestinians. Together with Al-Haq, we did an extensive report on it. We have written also to the United Nations, arguing that Heidelberg Cement definitely deserves a place on the UN database, the list of corporations that are involved in supporting, maintaining, or expanding and constructing settlements in the West Bank. Yes, going to the database. For several years, we have been together with Al-Haq and many other organizations around the world. We have been pushing for that database to be developed, to be a strong instrument for corporate accountability and to at some point be published. And that happened last year, February, finally. And now we are pushing for an annual update of that list so that corporations are held to account and that we can all know who is doing what, where, and that follow-up actions are possible. But yes, in the background, of course, we also know and we also knew that there was a criminalization happening of people, of groups that spoke out against the pillaging happening in Palestine, but also more broadly against the overall injustices of occupation, colonization, the denial of right of return. So we as SOMO, we focus on a very small part, which is corporate involvement, corporate complicity. And there was an amendment to the entry into Israel law, that's the legal foundation, supposedly, of this criminalization. And it says that you are forbidden, or you can be denied entry. Also, if you're a foreigner, you can be denied entry if you have been engaging in an actual, consistent and continuous activity aimed at promoting boycotts. Now that is, in my view anyway, it is very vague language, and you could interpret this in different ways. So when we say, the criminalization of BDS, I do put it in brackets there, or in hyphens, because there is no such thing as there's no mathematical definition of BDS. Let's say there's no. When I was being interrogated, but I'll get to that later, I also joked to the interrogator saying that, should I have a membership card? Should I have signed something to say that I sign on to this group? It's something that is constructed politically. So when it first started being used to keep foreigners out, it was selective targeting of individuals, not necessarily people who had a lot to do, the frontline BDS activism, but simply people that were going to be framed as such to try and, with the aim to scare away critics and scare away people who would feel somehow affiliated or connected to those advocacy messages that were being carried. So yeah, then in July 2018, to put it skeptically, it was our turn as SOMO. We, myself and my colleague Pauline Overeem, we were traveling into Israel-Palestine in July 2018. But upon arrival at Ben Gurion Airport, there was an unpleasant surprise, which was some type of interrogation. And in my case, there was already a file of some sort with screenshots of my social media posts from years ago lying on the desk. And there was already a decision ready on the table saying you will be denied entry based on this legislation, and you are BDS, and well, sign this and we can send you back to Amsterdam. I didn't sign, I did get sent back to Amsterdam. And what happened next is we have been, well, the first thing, no, maybe I should take one step back. What I found striking about the way that the denied entry was conducted is that it was conducted in a way to not just, it wasn't about me, I don't think it was about me necessarily, but it was very much outwardly directed. So when I was still being interrogated, there was already, news was already being pushed out by the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, the Ministry of Interior through Israeli media to say that I had been stopped at the border, at the airport. I had been denied entry. I was a BDS activist, and you know, they were not going to tolerate people like me coming into the country. So it was about sending that message to an audience outside, you know, people that are critical of what is happening in Palestine and who are speaking out. I think the message was to them. Also, another reason why I believe that is because for the whole time that I was in interrogation until I was put back on the plane, my belongings were taken from me, including my phone, quite violently. There was no way for me to access a phone, which people around me in the waiting room, you know, people that were going to be kicked out, everyone was on their phone, but I was denied access to my phone. And every official I asked, you know, can I use my phone? I need to make some phone calls. I have the right to call my embassy. I have the right to this, that, and the other. And they all had this pre-recorded sentence almost saying, no, you're not allowed to have your phone. And when I would ask why, they would say, yeah, we received orders. We received orders from the highest level. So it was clear to me that it was, in that sense, it was well organized. And the purpose was for me the purpose was so that I couldn't get my message out, so that I couldn't resist the deportation, so that I couldn't, for example, make a legal challenge or say, well, just put me in detention and I'll stay here until this is sorted out. That was all not an option. Yeah, so then what happened next? We engaged the Dutch authorities, asking them to, condemn, but also asking them to obtain more information, because other than a little piece of paper that I didn't sign, there was nothing that would justify or that would explain why I was denied entry. And for my colleague Pauline, there was not even there was nothing. There was no paper waiting for her, and she was not given a reason for why she was denied entry. We've requested information from the Israeli authorities to no avail. And when all of that didn't work, we started legal proceedings. The long story short is that we were denied access to information on all accounts. We filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the Israeli authorities, and they simply weren't giving further information until it was appealed and appealed. And then finally our lawyers, they did obtain some underlying document, it was basically a political screening and a listing of the work that we had been doing also as SOMO. So it made clear to us that possibly the research and the advocacy that we had been doing as SOMO, made us end up on their radar. So yeah, again, it's a political screening process. We thought it was very necessary to put in all the effort to get the information, because we did understand also after speaking with people who can know, people who are on the Palestinian side and people who've been working on shrinking civic space for years, they all say transparency is your friend. You are doing the work that you're doing. There's no obvious reason for why you shouldn't be allowed in. So put the burden of proof on them as much as possible. So the more information that comes out on you, about you, and about the reasons for your denied entry, the better it is, and the stronger it makes your case. And the more obvious it becomes to the Dutch government what this is all about, which is the broad context of shrinking civic space. So going to the Dutch government, we asked them to raise it with the Israeli authorities. They have raised it, but also, again, repeated that this is an issue of sovereignty. Every government has the right to decide who enters into their territory and who doesn't. And they don't take a position because they say, well, we don't have all the details, we don't quite know. So yeah, that has been quite frustrating, and that hasn't really changed. But I'll get back to that later when I speak about the larger context. Yeah, as I said, finally, we got some information that shows that our research work was connected to the denied entry. So what is next? The legal challenge of the decision to deny our entry led to nothing. And ironically, the Israeli court eventually said, or the authorities eventually said, you cannot challenge this decision of your denied entry anymore because you're too late. Well, the reason we were late in challenging is because we never got any information to base our legal challenge on. So we were set up to fail, obviously. But we are trying something new, which is challenging the status, the denied entry status, because that is something that is a legal status that has been imposed upon us, a denied entry status. Our lawyers discovered that such a denied entry status in and of itself has never been legally challenged before. So we are doing it now. And if the court confirms that you can legally challenge it, the denied entry status, then that might, we hope, that might set a positive precedent for anyone facing the same designation. I think there must be thousands of people from the Palestinian diaspora, activists, critics, journalists, who have this denied entry status. So if that can be, because it is a legal status, and if it can be legally challenged, if the court says it can be legally challenged, that would hopefully open the door to some successful proceedings by others as well, and will hopefully raise the threshold for the Israeli state to just do that, just hand out these red stamps and passports and say you're denied entry. The second thing we are doing is continuing our work. So there's no reason for us to stop working on the issues we've been working on. Yes, it becomes more difficult because we can no longer physically access Palestine, but working together with Al-Haq and other groups in Palestine is of course still possible and necessary. So that's one important thing that we will do, is just continuing to work and try not to let this drain our resources, because that's also very easy to have happen, that you get into the legal battles and you kind of lose sight of the work you're actually doing. What we think should be next on the part of the Dutch government and other third states is to respond to the broader pattern of shrinking civic space. So the case of me and Pauline is, this size in the whole grand scheme of things. But there are patterns, and there are always new developments. And what is happening now with the designation of the 6 NGOs is just the latest phase in that policy, in that approach of shrinking civic space. And it's not an excuse, but the response often given by third states, including the Netherlands, is, we need more information. We don't have all the facts. Let's wait to see all the facts. But that is exactly what authoritarian regimes will use, is to say, well, there's secret evidence. This is under investigation. This is intelligence. And they'll just say, they can just put the accusation out there, put you on the defense if you're not, if it works out in an awful way, you will be put on the defense. And third states will not take position, which means you're left hanging potentially without funding or with the risk of imprisonment, arrests, etc. So there needs to be a proactive stance. You cannot let authoritarian regimes like the Israeli government dictate how civil society can or cannot have space to conduct itself. So it needs to be recognized for what it is. This is an attack on civic space. And if there's any evidence, I'm sure that the Israeli authorities would have shared it a long time ago. So it needs to be recognized for what it is. It's not any different from any other authoritarian regime that we see around the world. And I think for wider civil society, we have a complementary role to play to that of states. So I think first and foremost, states have the responsibility to protect human rights. It's an active obligation, and we complement it. We don't have to take on the burden of that responsibility, but we complement by supporting each other, showing solidarity, organizing events like this, to analyze, organize, strategize. And I think, I think we are doing it. We need to continue doing it. And at some point, the pushback will be successful. But it's a struggle. I think in the Netherlands, we are now pushing for the Dutch government to take a better position, which will hopefully come through in the coming weeks or months. But there's, I think, as Giovanni said, there's no reason for us to be worried about implications here. And we shouldn't be distracted by these new policies and decisions. Let's continue what we're doing. And the fact that these rules are being made shows that the support from outside is something that the Israeli government is worried about and tries to cut off. So I guess that we're doing something right. Yeah, that's all I had to share.
Thanks a lot, Lydia, for this more personal story. I think also you can see the trends that happened in your case that Giovanni also described and that are happening now in the current designations that Wissam also talked about. Then we now move on to the Q&A part. I already saw quite some questions coming in. I saw that there were 3 similar questions or like 1 similar question for all 3 speakers. So let's start with that one. What would be your main message to people here listening? What can people do about this? Maybe we can start with Wissam, if that's possible, then we make a round.
Sure. Thank you very much, Thomas, for the question. And, it isn't, we can list a lot of suggestions, but really I have faith in the individual and their own ability to develop their understanding of their own context and the role that they can play within their particular situation, whether they're in positions of power in politics or in business or in academia. Every individual can play a role in challenging this issue, but also keeping in mind that the fact that we are still operating today after these issues, in my mind, shows that really the main target is you, the external support structure, the support system that exists that allows Palestinian solidarity to develop and the message to be amplified, and the tactic of using this issue of terrorist designation is really an attempt to scare you away from this continued support, scare you from raising it in academia, in politics, in business. And in order to counter that, we have to recognize how it's being used against us in a psychological manner, and that empowers us to be able to confront it. And I think different individuals have different capacities that they can develop using their particular individual situation. And it is at these times when we face adversity as a collective where some of the most innovative ideas to counter can develop. And so what I want to encourage those that want to do something is, rather than wait for a specific action to be taken or given a particular instruction from any one of us, is to think, where are you in this particular system, and what it is that you can do as an individual. And I have full confidence that if all of us are working together in the same direction, regardless of if those actions are being coordinated or not, so long as the direction is the same, it will have a positive impact.
Thanks, Wissam. Anything to add, Giovanni?
It's difficult to add something more because I fully endorse what Wissam said, and he said it in such a nice way with very accurate words. Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think that we must be aware we are all part of a single movement, which is based on different actors, where you have activists, academics, students, human rights advocates. So the most important thing is joining this, I would say, but this really follows what Wissam was also saying. So yeah, nothing more to add besides that.
Thanks, Giovanni.
Yeah, what to add to Wissam? I agree as well, 100%. Yeah, I think in addition to what Wissam said, I mean, if anything, all of this should be an encouragement for us all. It means we're clearly, there's clearly a threat coming from our collective efforts, of some sort. So don't take it as an encouragement rather than something to scare us off. I think it's a sign that we're moving and shaking things. And also, as an individual, it might, having focused on human rights issues in Palestine for some years now, it is easy to feel discouraged or to feel hopeless at times, and we're all human, and I think it's fine to sometimes not feel the energy or not feel that we're getting anywhere, but we're all just doing our little parts, and it's about our collective impact. So I think keep your chin up, keep doing your own little thing, whether it is in a trade union or in your university, or asking, just the other day I was at a halal butcher in our neighborhood, and he was selling dates from Israel. And I asked him, what are you doing? And we had a 20-minute conversation. It's the small things that you can do. So keep doing the small things in addition to the little things. And yeah, don't get discouraged. Also, I think for every national context, because we're here convened around links to the Dutch context, which was uncovered in the ELSC report. It can help to connect things to a threat that is closer to home, exactly like ELSC has been doing, but also journalists that are pointing out how the spyware of Pegasus is being used by other regimes in other situations. So show to a larger audience that this threat will come to you eventually. Pegasus is not going to stay in its laboratory targeting Palestinians. It's going to come into your computer, into your phone, whenever some government or authority decides that it wants to. So not targeting the, how would I put it, the egocentrism of people, but people will see their self-interest as well. That all of the military surveillance testing, that's happening in the lab called the Gaza Strip, that is it's already here. And we need to show to people that if you don't stand up for human rights against the authoritarian regime, colonial regime elsewhere, it will be imported here eventually. So make the connections when you can. I think that is helpful. And And I'm grateful to ELSC and to anyone who has been doing that in recent years.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Just to add indeed on this, because I forgot to say that too. It's actually important, and indeed it's important to speak out. And in case you face any form of repression, to let us know and inform us, because this is the main goal of our organization, is to support people who are facing issues. So also, if any one of you have any kind of issues, please contact us.
And also, if I can add as well, the message that we've heard about, especially from Lydia, and the importance of the work that they're doing and that we're all doing, and how it's the nature of that work and the message that it delivers is really what scares Israel and what leads them to take this action. And their attempt to try to silence the messenger needs to be taken as an opportunity to amplify the message. And their desire to isolate 6 organizations as if the message will somehow disappear is very similar to the anti-BDS legislation as well. But it is taking these attempts to restrict the message and amplifying it on your part is one of the tactics that we can use to really just simply take away the force of what they are trying to do by countering it with an even stronger message. And the Palestinian injustices that we face are really a microcosm of global injustice, and we see similar things in different parts of the world. And I of course appreciate the efforts with regard to Palestinian solidarity, but I also very much appreciate the work being done on addressing injustices in different parts of the world as well, because those injustices, when they are confronted, they are confronting the injustices that the Palestinians are facing as well, because this injustice is very much a global issue that needs to be addressed.
Thanks a lot, Wissam, and also Lydia and Giovanni. So an interesting question popping up about the ICC investigation, and I want to take it a bit broader, if you allow me. So what consequences does the designation of the 6 NGOs have for the ICC investigation? And I would like to take it 2 ways. So on the one hand, does it influence the information provision by the designated organization? Does that influence the position of the NGOs? And also the other way around. So does potentially the designation could be part of the investigation at all? Sorry if I'm making it a bit more difficult, but Wissam, maybe to give the floor to you as first, and maybe the others to add.
Sure. I'll address the second question first, because I think that's the more challenging one that I really don't have an answer to, how it would play out in the broader investigation. Obviously, the ICC is set up to address the most grave crimes, and this issue is important, but I don't know if the ICC, considering everything else it has on its table, that this would be one of the things it would take into consideration. With regard to how the designation addresses the influences the information going to the ICC, I think this is, part of the reason Israel is taking these steps against Palestinian civil society. Particularly, some of those organizations are very much involved in the ICC process and providing information. And the thought that by eliminating these organizations, we eliminate the flow of the information into the ICC. Again, this can be countered by showing that others are also able to submit similar information. The information that we provide is important, but it's also part of a lot of the other information that can be collected and gathered, and having additional actors beyond us submitting information with regard to the ICC. Again, undermining Israel's attempt to circumvent the flow of information to the ICC by targeting us as individual organizations, because it is the crimes that are being committed that are being addressed by us, and those can also be addressed by others.
Thanks a lot, Lydia and Giovanni. Anything to add? Or?
Yeah. You want to go first, Giovanni?
No. Go ahead, because I have nothing else to add.
Well, I think, and I hope I'm not oversimplifying it, but I do think the answer to the question might be very straightforward. So the ICC, indeed, it investigates war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, acts of genocide. And I think what the designation of the 6 organizations, I don't think even not even the accusation amounts to something that would fall under the Rome Statute, I think, but also for the prosecutor, for the office of the prosecutor of the ICC, to include it in their investigations, there would have to be, evidence. There would have to be something communicated to them. There would have to be ample reason for them to devote time and resources into investigating the potential terrorist nature of these groups. And since there is no evidence, I think there's no need for the office of the prosecutor to look into this at all. That's my hopefully not oversimplified view. And the other is the impacts on the investigation, the information provision. Time will tell. I hope not, and at this point it doesn't look like it. Like Wissam said, the target seems to be, the outside supporters of Al-Haq and Ad-Damir and all the others. It's to scare away funders. It's to cut off the lifeline really for some organizations. So as long as that doesn't happen, and the groups that are providing information to the ICC can continue their work, then it shouldn't have an impact. But that's really on us. That's on us. That's on our governments. That's on the EU. That's on all, all the bodies that are involved in funding and support to these groups. So, and in terms of Israel's collaboration or cooperation, I should say, with the ICC, there's nothing lost there because they are not collaborating. So I don't yet see anything lost unless we let them.
And if I can add, you just triggered another idea that I've heard in the discussions as well outside of this specific panel discussion, but the issue of the obstruction of justice and the fact that those actors that are taking these steps against us are the same actors that could be subject to the jurisdiction of the ICC, and how these steps could be seen as an attempt to obstruct the ICC's work. This might be something that some of our participants might be interested in looking at further as well.
Thanks, Wissam. Also, thanks, Lydia. Then the next question, quite some questions came in about the role of companies. So the focus has been quite a lot on EU and governments and what they should do, but a significant effect also do have the private companies, as they are also part of the problem. Cultural domination narrative is critical for fully campaigning for Palestinian rights. What are your thoughts on that? I know, Lydia, that you touched upon it a bit on the role of companies. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on that? And if you see also a link with companies and this whole repression and what role they could play, maybe in light of the UN database.
Yeah. Cool. Well, in the broader scale, there's so many levels, right? So there's companies in relation to civic space. So maybe I'll address that first. Well, we have, or we, not me personally, people more broadly, have been calling out social media companies for the censoring of Palestinian voices. There's Hamle, the Palestinian group. There's collectives outside Palestine as well that are really calling out these companies and saying, listen, you are part of the problem. You are conducting the shrinking of civic space by your actions, and by deleting or blocking Palestinian accounts, etc. So I think that's the most obvious link, between the Palestinian context of civil society and private corporations, where really they are not operating in line with their obligations. So they're not respecting human rights. And for that, I think we need to keep pushing them, and wherever we can, yeah, get it publicly on the record that it is not okay, it's not justified, it is contrary to the international standards on business and human rights, and yeah, we need to educate them clearly, unfortunately. Then more broadly, another example is, companies can divest from, their involvement in unlawful acts in Palestine, and they do. Sometimes it's a pension fund, sometimes it can be any type of company, and it would be most helpful if those companies do issue strong statements as they leave, as they responsibly divest from those violations. So, for example, when Ben & Jerry's pulled out, I thought it was very vague. And when I looked at their statement on their website, they said, we are withdrawing from there specifically because it's contrary to our policies. Well, please just say what that is. I mean, mention the word human rights somewhere, mention the word violations somewhere. And they didn't do that. So I think companies should use their privilege and should use their position and the reach they have with their media channels, but also the attention they surely will know their announcements attract. They have the luxury of setting an example, so they should use it. And I don't think they always take the full possibility. I'm reading the question in the chat. Yes, they're part of the problem. Cultural domination and narrative is critical for fully campaigning for Palestinian rights. Yeah, that's the other thing. And I think it was called out as well. For example, Netflix, until very recently, had the content is still on there, the worst insidious content in relation to, of course, a racist portrayal of Arabs in general, and then Palestinians in particular. As you know, there's something terrorist about them. We all know the examples that are existing on Netflix. And even, I think it was Al-Haq that was mentioned in Homeland at some point. It is ridiculous, it's crazy. And it was called out by civil society. And now, about a month ago, I believe, a couple dozen of Palestinian-produced films, documentaries, and series were added under the header of Palestinian stories. So I think narrative, cultural narrative, awareness, and countering that racism that is underlying a lot of that content, I think, is important as well, because I think it is interrelated. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement has made the connections beautifully, which is great. But for a broader audience to have open ears and eyes, I think there is sometimes also a barrier to overcome, which is really caused by these harmful narratives that are being put out there. So I've only addressed like a few minor examples. Yeah, the do no harm is the overarching one. Like, don't be linked or involved in violations, but there's more they can do than just that.
If I can add as well, and I think the role of corporations fits within this broader economic incentive structure that Israel has in the refinement of its best business practice of colonialism, and the issue of the development of research and technology in this the cyber area is a case in point of how Israel is able to make use of the captive population to develop such technology, not only use it against the Palestinian population, but also export it abroad. And those exports are to willing buyers, and those buyers support the economic incentive structure for Israel to continue, because it is reaping a benefit from its activities. And to put it in a more direct, maybe actionable point to you as European civil society and Dutch civil society in particular, these relationships that Israel has and agreements such as the Horizon Agreement on research cooperation, I think this is an important opportunity for you to step up and say, we need to freeze these kind of agreements until we better understand how these agreements and the kind of cooperation is contributing to this issue as well. And I think you know, a full inquiry into the EU's relationship with Israel in areas of research and development and trade and investment, how this is contributing to the development of such technologies and their use and abuse, not only within the Palestinian context, but elsewhere as well. And I think this is one of the things that could be done in a very immediate sense to put a freeze on moving forward with agreements such as the Horizon Agreement. Because so long as there's this sense that there are benefits being reaped through this cooperation, then the violations that are being committed during the course of this research and development will be seen as simply secondary to the benefits that are being reaped from it. And obviously this has very long-reaching ramifications of the impact on you know, the society as a whole in a global sense that we need to step up and try to address.
Thanks a lot, go ahead, Giovanni.
You know, just to add very briefly, because indeed already Lydia and Wissam addressed the topic very, very well. And I would like, and as Lydia also was saying, we have different levels. You know, I mean, we have companies who are involved in enforcing human rights violation in Palestine, or we have companies which are enforced in enabling shrinking space as social media platforms. For instance, I would just focus on the second one because are the companies we're mostly dealing with, which actually are social media platforms or banks and financial providers, which indeed most of the time, let's say, they surrender to the allegation coming from lawful actors, and by doing so, they ban pro-Palestinian voices. In this case, first of all, if you have, I mean, I will repeat this again, it's always, to me, very, very important to don't surrender and organize even more to react. Because our experience is that most of the time when people, I don't know, they delete your Facebook page or they block you on Instagram, most of the time people just get scared and take a step back. What we actually notice is that when people are connected to one another and when they are supported, it's actually possible to fight back and to push back, and this is possible only if people are organized themselves collectively and are supported. We just put it in the chat this form by AMLE report. If you have any incidents with social media platform, report this to them. Okay, because they have direct access also with these companies, they can speak with them, and in general also for other companies and providers, we had some experience with them, and in some cases it's absolutely possible to come out because all these companies are just very also afraid of a reputational damage. So when you can show pattern of discrimination of a specific company against a specific group of people, and you start calling out for what it is, companies will think it twice the next time. Because for them, most of the time, it's a business decision, which is based on pro and cons on how much they earn or how much they will lose. That's it. But when they realize that the reputational damage they can't face because people start organizing and calling them out for what they're doing publicly, well, next time they will think twice for sure. So that's it.
Thanks a lot, Giovanni, and also Wissam for that addition of Lydia. Then one specific question directed to Giovanni. In light of the suppression of civic space, you mentioned the funding as one of the targets or one of the approaches that's being used, one of the strategies. Can the Dutch state have an influence on Dutch banks to prevent them from stopping their financial services to the designated NGOs?
Yes, by taking a very strong statement rejecting the designation. Because it's just a matter, also here, it's just a matter of legitimacy. And it's a matter of risk, like bank of these service providers, they don't want to take any risk. So if the Dutch government take a really strong stance saying that there is no risk, the designation must be rejected because it violates fundamental rights. I mean, if I reject it, then this will surely have huge consequences for financial service providers and banks as well. So then again, the point would be to make political pressure to push the government to take such a step, I would say.
Thanks a lot, Giovanni. And then a question for clarification came in during the talk about the legality of the decision. So first, it seems like that the decision was only valid for Israel, and then later a military order followed, making it also applicable to the occupied Palestinian territory. How does that work exactly? Because that means that there are two different systems. And is it normally that first something becomes law in Israel and then follows by a military order in the occupied Palestinian territory? Maybe Wissam would be the best person to go for this question about the legal system.
No, I don't think I would be the best, but I will try to address it in the sense that the fact of two different systems operating is part of the indicators of an apartheid regime, and that's how it is being developed, and then apartheid is a part of the broader strategy of colonialism as a policy. And I think there were questions raised about the move on the Ministry of Defense first, then the issuance of the military order, but I don't think it's worth speculating on the direct implications, because we see these issues as being very much political in nature, and I think we should make sure that we continue to push back on the political level and not get lost in the legal nuances, because that becomes part of the strategy of distraction as well.
Thanks. Anyone, anything to add, Giovanni or Lydia? No? Good. There we are, almost at the end. So if you still want to ask a question, please do so now. Now there's still time. There's also discussion I see in the chat around using the word shrinking civil space, which is quite an interesting one, I think. So there's a comment: for every one person who is silenced, there are tens of thousands more that are speaking out against the crime Israel's apartheid regime in this case. How do you reflect on that? So indeed, like it seems like also with this decision, that while there are 6 organizations being labeled as terrorists, that a lot of civil society organizations are speaking out, a lot of media organizations are speaking out. Could it also have a kind of a positive effect of really showing what is going on to more people, or would that be too positive of an interpretation? Maybe starting with Lydia.
Yeah, I want to believe that it has, at least it has a positive impact on awareness of people outside of Palestine, of what the system is about. You know, it's about oppression, it's about extraction of resources, it is about domination. So yes, I want to believe that these are the kinds of events that show the true colors and the true nature of the political system. But it's not a given that it is properly portrayed and contextualized and narrated in our media. So we as civil society, I think we are trying to do what we can, and we should do what we can to make sure that it is properly understood, interpreted, and recognized for what it is. But at least in the Dutch context, I do see, I do very slowly, but I do see a shift in the right direction. Yeah, there's in media, they often say there's an Israel-Palestine fatigue, and I'm sure that's true. But it's no longer something outrageous to say, that there's an occupation and a racist system in place in Palestine. It's kind of common knowledge now that something is really wrong. So apart from the disastrous impacts on Palestinians of all these developments, it is showing to the outside, it is showing the true colors and intention of the policies. And I think also, last point, in the Dutch context. I think when it is about restricting freedom of expression, or when it is about putting a ban on human rights groups, etc., I do think that strikes a particular chord here with people. That's when they start to notice that something is really off. So yeah, we just need to make sure that it keeps getting the attention, and that the interpretation of it happens correctly. I think that's really important.
Thanks a lot, Lydia, for answering that. I also just saw in the chat that someone mentioned that the Reporters Without Borders awarded prizes today, and that two of the people who won are Palestinian journalists and the people behind the Pegasus project. So that's also an interesting development, I think, in light of this. And also a question came in related to that, the discovery, or kind of related. The discovery of the surveillance by the Israeli NSO group seems connected to the designation. What can the Netherlands and the EU do about this illegal surveillance? So it's really about this, the surveillance in general. We talked already about it a bit. Is there anyone who would like to tell a bit more about that or elaborate a bit more about that? Maybe Giovanni?
I will leave also, I think also with Sam as something, I will leave the floor to him first if he wants. Then yes, I would have a couple of ideas on Netherlands and EU could do on this.
So we sent the question what the Netherlands and the EU could do about this illegal surveillance around the NSO.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue of conducting an inquiry into understanding what role the EU relationship with regard to research and development, trade and investment, and understanding the connections between the development and use and abuse of such technology, and how the EU's relationship with Israel is contributing to this is very important and essential to really understand and not disconnect the relationships on areas of research and development to what is happening on the ground.
Yeah, and in addition, I think that one thing that could be done would be, I mean, regarding, for instance, NSO, which is the company which is selling Pegasus, like the United States, the Home Department, they blacklisted the NSO, which means they cannot, if I'm not mistaken, they cannot sell or anything in the United States, which is a huge financial backlash for them. And I think that in the light of what happens to dear colleagues of Al-Haq, I think that the European Union and the Netherlands should push for a similar ban in Europe as well. Because it's kind of ludicrous that companies which have a long history on record of selling this kind of softwares to authoritarian regimes, and now also using these softwares against human rights defenders that the European Union also financed and supported, should be, I think, a legitimate concern, and should be also the right moment for avoiding that this company can work in Europe, and if they can continue their economical transaction with European actors. I think.
And maybe a small addition, and in addition to that, I think the European Union and member states, including the Netherlands, need to take another critical look at the loopholes and the gaps in their laws, because yes, they can blacklist companies like NSO Group, and they should do so. There's all the reason for them to do so. But I think that the protections and the safeguards for us as citizens or for people living here are not fully in place. There's still definitely things lacking in terms of digital protections, safeguards, privacy, etc. So that whole system is in need of improvement and advancement, because it hasn't kept up with the technological developments. So that's a more broad issue that goes beyond NSO Group. But in the meantime, yes, NSO Group has nothing to do here, should have no business here.
Thanks a lot.
And I think an additional point is how Israel is, again, marketing itself as a hub for investment and multinational corporations to come and develop data centers and server farms And you can imagine the dangers of having all this information as Europe is elevating its concerns and actions with regard to privacy to put such information in the hands of the Israeli authorities, that we've seen how they are able to use such information in a manner that undermines the privacy and the ability to operate in general. And I think this should be something of concern for European and Dutch citizens as well.
Thanks a lot. I think we came to the end of this webinar. I want to thank everyone a lot for asking questions, also for sharing ideas and things in the chat. A lot of interesting documents and articles also popped by, I saw. I hope you enjoyed it. Also, really thanks a lot to our speakers, Wissam, Lydia, Giovanni, to the organizing team of ELSC behind the scenes for dealing with the questions and organizing all the technical stuff behind the scenes. And hope to see you again at the next webinar. Have a nice evening or day, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.